Sometimes, the people we trust the most are the ones who betray us in ways we never saw coming. I spent 35 years waiting for a man I thought I'd lost forever. When he suddenly came back into my life, I believed it was fate. I believed it was second chances. I believed it was love finally finding its way home. But what I discovered in a single moment, through a photograph I was never meant to see, shattered not just my faith in him, but my faith in the woman who raised me. This is the story of how one photo revealed a decade of lies, and how I learned that sometimes the people we love the most are strangers wearing familiar faces. Real life-inspired emotional stories from USA, Canada, UAE, and Europe, filled with truth, betrayal, love, and redemption. Each story touches the soul and reveals what really happens behind closed doors. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing to Golden Year Stories. It helps more people become aware of the reality of heartbreak and family betrayal at any age. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Margaret Chen, though everyone who knows me calls me Maggie. I'm 62 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life believing that some people are meant to come into your life for a season and then leave. I believed that until David Patterson sent me a friend request on Facebook on a Tuesday morning in March. I remember the exact date because I was sitting in my kitchen with my coffee, reading the news on my tablet when the notification popped up. David Patterson would like to add you as a friend. My hands actually trembled as I clicked on his profile. It was him. Older, of course. His dark hair had turned silver, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when we were young. But unmistakably him. The same warm smile. The same kind eyes that had made 17-year-old me believe in forever. I hadn't thought about David in years. Well, that's not entirely true. I thought about him on rainy days, or when I heard a particular song on the radio, or late at night when sleep wouldn't come. But it was the kind of thinking you do about the past. Wistful, distant. The way you might think about a beautiful dream you had once and could never quite remember upon waking. David Patterson was my first love. We met in high school in the fall of 1982, in our English class. He sat 2 rows behind me, and I remember the moment I first became aware of him. Not when I turned around and saw his face, but when I felt him looking at me. There's something about being looked at with genuine attention and affection that you can feel like a warmth on your skin. I felt that warmth, and when I finally turned to look, he smiled. That smile changed my life. We dated for 2 years, the kind of intense, all-consuming teenage romance that feels like it will last forever because you've never known anything else. We talked about our futures together. We planned to go to the same college. We made promises under starlight in the parking lot behind the football field. And then, the summer after we graduated, David got offered a full scholarship to Yale. It was everything he'd worked for, everything he deserved, and it was 3,000 miles away. We tried to do long distance, but this was 1984. There was no texting, no video calls, no social media to keep us connected. There were expensive phone calls and letters that took days to arrive. The distance was too great, and we were too young. By the time he came home for Thanksgiving, we both knew it was over. We ended it gently. The way you do when you love someone, but love isn't enough to overcome the geography of your lives. I hadn't seen him since that day at the airport when I watched him board a plane to Connecticut. Now, 35 years later, he was asking to be my friend on Facebook. I accepted the request without hesitation. Within an hour, a message appeared in my inbox. "Maggie, I can't believe I found you. It's really me, David. I hope this isn't weird. I was thinking about you the other day and decided to try searching for you online. How have you been? I'd love to catch up. Are you on Messenger?" I read the message 5 times before responding. My heart was racing in a way that felt both ridiculous and impossible. I was 62 years old. I was a grandmother. I'd been married for 30 years and widowed for 4. I shouldn't have been feeling like a nervous teenager. And yet I was. "David, it's so good to hear from you. I can't believe you found me." "Yes, let's catch up. There's so much to tell." That first conversation turned into many conversations. David had lived an interesting life. He'd graduated from Yale, gone to law school, built a successful career in New York City. He'd been married twice. The first marriage lasted 10 years, ended without children. The second marriage had lasted 22 years but ended in divorce 5 years ago. He had no children, which he said was one of his great regrets. He'd recently retired from his law practice and was considering moving back to our hometown, looking for a simpler way of life after so many years in the fast lane. I told him about my life too. My nursing career, my marriage to Robert, who was a kind and steady man, but who I'd never loved with the intensity I'd felt for David. And I was ashamed of myself for even thinking that. But it was the truth. I told him about my children, about my years as a devoted wife and mother. I told him about the joy of becoming a grandmother. And I told him about Robert's sudden death from a heart attack 4 years ago, and how I'd spent the last 4 years finding my footing in a life I hadn't expected to live alone. I always thought we'd meet again, David wrote one evening. Not in a grand way or anything, just I always had this feeling that our story wasn't finished. I know that probably sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy, I wrote back. I felt it too sometimes. Like there was something unfinished between us. That was the moment I crossed an invisible line in my own heart. That was the moment I started hoping for something I had no business hoping for. 3 weeks after that first message, David called me on the phone. We talked for 3 hours. His voice was older, of course, deeper and rougher around the edges, but underneath it was the same person I'd known all those years ago. He told me jokes that made me laugh until my sides hurt. He asked me real questions and actually listened to my answers. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in a very long time. "I'm coming to visit," he said before we hung up. "I want to see you in person. I want to see if what we had is still there, or if it's just nostalgia." "It's not crazy," I said. "I want that too." 2 weeks later, on a warm Friday evening in April, I stood in the parking lot of the airport and watched David walk toward me through the automatic doors. He looked for a moment like a stranger, and then he looked like himself, and my breath caught in my throat in a way that felt entirely too familiar and entirely too dangerous. He pulled me into a hug, and I let myself believe, for just a moment, that maybe second chances were real. Maybe fate did exist. Maybe some people were worth waiting for, even if you didn't know you were waiting. If I had known then what I would discover a month later, I would have walked away without looking back. But I didn't know. I was vulnerable and lonely and hopeful, and he was familiar and charming and attentive. I was completely, utterly unprepared for the truth. David met my mother 2 days after he arrived. I'd been visiting her every other day for the past 4 years, since Robert died. My mother, Diane, was 88 years old and living in a comfortable, assisted living facility called Sunset Gardens. She'd been there for 3 years, after a fall that left her mobility limited. She was sharp as a tack mentally, but physically she was slowing down. I worried about her being lonely. I visited often, brought her flowers and magazines, sat with her while we watched her favorite shows. She'd been thrilled when I told her that David was visiting. "Oh, Maggie, how romantic!" she'd said over the phone. "You should bring him to see me. I'd love to meet your old flame." I almost didn't, to be honest. But David said he'd like to, and I didn't want to seem like I was trying to hide him away from my family. So on a Saturday afternoon, we drove over to Sunset Gardens with a box of her favorite pastries from the Italian bakery downtown. She was sitting in the common room when we arrived, near the big windows that overlooked the gardens. She'd had her hair done. She always did on Saturdays. And she was wearing the blue sweater that brought out her eyes. She stood up carefully when she saw us, and David moved immediately to help her, offering his arm with a gentleness that I found touching. "You must be David," my mother said, her voice warm and curious. "Maggie's told me so much about you." "I hope she said good things," he said with that smile. And my mother actually giggled like a schoolgirl, and patted his arm. He stayed with her for an hour while we visited, and I watched them talk. They discussed books. David had always been well-read, and my mother loved to read. They talked about travel. David asked her questions about her life, and she bloomed under the attention in a way that made me smile. I was grateful, I thought, that David was kind to her, that he treated her with respect and genuine interest. I had no idea what that respect was hiding. David stayed for 10 days that first visit. Those 10 days were like stepping into an alternate version of my life, one where different choices had been made and different paths had been taken. We fell into each other easily, As if 35 years hadn't passed at all. We visited the places we'd loved in high school. The lake where we'd had our first kiss, the old diner that still stood downtown, the lookout point where we'd spent countless nights talking about our dreams. We held hands, we kissed. At 62 years old, I felt like a teenager again. And I didn't question whether that was wise or foolish. I simply let myself feel. David was attentive in a way that made me feel cherished. He remembered details about my life from our conversations and asked thoughtful follow-up questions. He sent me a text message the morning after he returned to the city. Missing you already. When can I come back? I'm thinking about relocating here permanently. I've already started looking at houses. I should have been cautious. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs. But I wasn't cautious. I was lonely, and I was hopeful, and I was in love with the idea of a second chance. Over the next few weeks, David came to visit every other weekend. We went out to dinner. We took walks through the park. We spent quiet evenings at my house with wine and conversation, and I introduced him to more of my life, including more time with my mother. Here's where I need to be honest about something. I was excited to share David with my mother. I thought it reflected well on me, somehow. Look, I was bringing a successful, accomplished man into their lives. Look, I was being chosen by someone like that. I wanted my mother to see that I was worthy of love, worthy of being wanted. I know how that sounds now. Desperate. Sad. But it's the truth. My mother seemed delighted by David's visits. She always made an effort when she knew he was coming. She'd have her hair done, she'd wear nice clothes, she'd ask the staff to arrange the sitting room nicely. They'd talk for hours while I'd step away to give them time together, thinking I was being generous, thinking I was being a good daughter by not monopolizing his time. I was being blind. It must have started sometime during those early visits. I don't know exactly when. I don't know if it was something my mother initiated or something David initiated. I don't know if it was calculated or if it simply happened, the way some things do when two people find themselves drawn to each other. But it happened. And neither of them told me. The first sign, though I didn't recognize it as a sign, came in early June, about 2 months after David and I had reconnected. I had brought David to visit my mother, but I'd forgotten something in the car. I went back to get it, and when I returned to the facility and made my way to her room, I found them in her sitting area with their heads close together, looking at something on David's phone. They sprang apart quickly when I walked in, almost comically so. "Oh, Maggie," my mother said brightly. "David was just showing me photos from a trip he took to Italy. Absolutely beautiful." David smiled his easy smile. "Your mother has great taste." She pointed out details in the photos I'd completely missed. It seemed innocent, it seemed sweet even. My mother was lonely and David was being kind to her. I felt warm inside, grateful that the two people I cared about were getting along so well. I was such a fool. By July, David was talking seriously about moving back. He'd put in an offer on a house not far from my own. He was wrapping up his final affairs in New York. He talked about the future in a way that included me. A future where we might travel together, where we might build something real. He talked about marriage. Not immediately, but eventually. He said he wanted to do it right this time, to know it was real before making promises. I believed him. I believed every word. My mother seemed happy during this time too. Content even. She had more energy than I'd seen in years. She was always smiling. The staff at Sunset Gardens would comment on how much brighter she seemed. I attributed it to her having more company, more stimulation. I didn't know it was something else entirely. By August, David had closed on his house. He was officially relocated. He was part of my life now, not just a visitor. He'd met my children, my grandchildren. He spent time at family dinners. My daughter actually pulled me aside one day and said, "Mom, he seems really nice. I'm happy you found someone after Dad." I was so proud. I felt like I'd somehow succeeded at something important. David and I settled into a routine. He would come to my house several times a week. We'd cook together, watch movies, spend time in my garden. And he would visit my mother at Sunset Gardens regularly, both with me and, increasingly, without me. "Your mother likes my company," he said, when I asked him once why he was heading over there without me. "She was telling me how much she misses having male company since your father passed. I don't mind, it makes her happy." This seemed reasonable. This seemed kind. He was being a good person, I thought. He was being the kind of man who thinks about other people's happiness and does small things to help. I should have questioned why he started visiting her alone. I should have asked myself why he was so generous with his time in that particular way. I should have noticed the small changes in my mother's behavior, the way she seemed almost nervous when I was around, the way she'd steer conversations away from David, the way she started asking me questions about whether David and I were serious, whether we were planning to get married soon. But I didn't notice. Or rather, I noticed and I explained the things away. People are blind when they don't want to see the truth. We have remarkable abilities to reinterpret evidence, to create narratives that allow us to keep believing what we want to believe. By September, David and I had been back in each other's lives for 6 months. He asked me to marry him on a Thursday evening, sitting in my garden with wine, and the last of the summer flowers still blooming. He proposed with a simple diamond ring that he said had belonged to his grandmother. It was beautiful and intimate, and exactly what I dreamed of at 17. I said yes without hesitation. We decided to have a small wedding in November, just family and close friends. My mother was thrilled. She wanted to help plan it. She wanted to buy herself a special dress. She talked about it constantly when I visited her. David also seemed thrilled. He helped me plan. He was involved and enthusiastic and present in all the ways I'd always wanted a partner to be. He felt like home. He felt like coming full circle. He felt like proof that the universe rewarded patience and belief in second chances. I was happy in a way I hadn't been since Robert died. Maybe in a way I'd never been, if I was being completely honest. This felt different from my marriage to Robert. This felt electric and alive and full of meaning. My mother was happy too, or so I thought. Looking back now, I wonder if that happiness was guilt, if she was celebrating with me while carrying a secret that was tearing her apart. Or perhaps she wasn't torn at all. Perhaps she was simply enjoying what she was enjoying and had made peace with the deception in the way some people can. I'll never know, because I never got the chance to ask her. September turned into October. The wedding planning continued. David and I began talking about where we'd live, my house or his, or perhaps somewhere new together. We talked about travel. We talked about the future in a way that felt solid and real. And then, on a Tuesday evening in early October, everything changed. I was at David's house. We'd had dinner together. He'd cooked my favorite pasta dish. We'd been talking about the wedding, about honeymoon plans. After dinner, we'd moved to the couch to watch a movie, the way we often did. I was nestled against his side, his arm around me, and my phone was sitting on the coffee table. His phone was sitting on the couch between us. Somewhere around 9 o'clock, a text notification came through on his phone. The screen lit up, and from my position against his side, I could see it clearly. The message was from my mother. The preview text was brief. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. I found that thing you like." I felt something cold move through my chest, a text from my mother to David, using casual, intimate language. Planning to see him. Tomorrow, when I wasn't scheduled to be there, I lifted my head. Was that a text from my mother? David's body went rigid beside me. He reached for his phone quickly, too quickly. What? No. It was probably spam. My phone's been getting a lot of spam lately. But I'd seen my mother's name. I'd heard the familiar ding of her text notification, different from the generic sounds of spam. It said, "Your mother," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. The preview text. I could see your mother's name. You were reading my text messages. There was an edge to his voice now, a defensiveness that hadn't been there moments before. No, the preview just came up. "David, what was she texting you about?" He stood up abruptly, creating distance between us. "It's nothing. Your mother and I are friends. We text sometimes." "I don't see why that's a problem." "What do you mean, you text sometimes? Why would you text my mother? She texts me. She asks me questions about things. She's lonely, Maggie. I'm trying to be kind to her." I stood up too. My heart was racing and there was a high-pitched sound in my ears. "What kind of things?" "Just things. Advice about television shows she's watching. Links to articles she thinks I'd like. It's not a big deal." But it was a big deal. I could feel it in the way he was talking, in the way he wasn't quite meeting my eyes, in the way he'd moved away from me. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. "Can I see your phone?" I asked quietly. "No," he said. That's a violation of privacy. If you don't trust me, Maggie, then we have a bigger problem than a few text messages from your mother. And maybe that should have been enough to make me back down. Maybe I should have apologized and let it go. But I couldn't, because I could feel the lie. I could feel it the way you feel a storm coming. The change in pressure, the electricity in the air, the sense that something is about to break. Show me the phone, I said again. No, David, if there's nothing wrong. Why won't you show me? Because I don't appreciate being treated like I'm doing something wrong when I'm not. Your mother is a kind, intelligent woman, and we've become friends. That's all this is. But I was already moving toward him. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I wasn't thinking at all. Maybe I was just reacting on instinct. He set the phone down on the coffee table and crossed his arms across his chest, but he didn't stop me as I reached for it. The phone wasn't locked. That's what I noticed first. An unlocked phone in 2024, just sitting there. His messages were open. I scrolled back through the thread with my mother. What I saw in those messages changed everything. The messages started from months ago, months. Before I even knew David had moved back to town permanently. Can't wait to see you this weekend. My mother had written in early August. David's response, me too. You know how I feel about you. Further back, I miss you. When can you come by again? Tomorrow. I'll tell Maggie I need some time alone. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I scrolled further back, my stomach churning with each message. Intimate details. Inside jokes. A whole relationship that existed parallel to the one David and I were building. A relationship between my fiancé and my mother. My 88-year-old mother. Oh my God, I whispered. I looked up at David, who was standing with his arms still crossed, his jaw clenched. How long? Maggie, you don't understand. How long? It started when I first came to visit. Your mother she made it clear she was interested. I didn't plan it. It just happened. The words didn't make sense to me. They seemed to be in English, but I couldn't comprehend their meaning. My brain wouldn't accept what I was hearing. She's my mother, I said. My voice sounded very far away. She's 80. 8 years old, David. 88. And you're... I couldn't finish the sentence. I couldn't find words big enough to contain what I was feeling. She's a grown woman, David said, and now there was something harder in his voice, something defensive and cold. She made her own choices. She wanted this as much as I did. I don't believe you. Believe what you want. He took a step toward me and I stepped back. But your mother is lonely. She's been lonely for years. Yes, I spent time with her. Yes, we became close, and yes, it became physical. But it made her happy. She hasn't been happy in years. And I made her happy. The phone was still in my hand. I looked down at the messages again. There was a photo attachment. I clicked on it without thinking, and then I wished I hadn't. It was a photo of my mother. Just her face, but she was smiling in a way I'd never seen before. Radiant, flushed, in a way that only comes from being desired. I dropped the phone like it had burned me. I can't. I started, but I couldn't finish. I couldn't think in complete sentences. The room was spinning. I need to sit down. I sat. David didn't offer me anything or try to comfort me. He just stood there, waiting for me to process what he'd told me. When were you going to tell me? I asked. I wasn't. I didn't want to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me. I looked up at him. David, you were going to marry me. You were going to marry me while you were sleeping with my mother. I love you, he said. And he said it so calmly, so reasonably, like it was a simple fact that had no bearing on anything else. That's not a lie. I do love you. But I also care deeply for your mother. People are complicated. Love isn't always simple. That's not love, I said. That's a lie. That's a betrayal. That said, I stood up abruptly. I needed to get out of his house. I needed air. I needed to think, though I couldn't imagine how I would ever think clearly again. Where are you going? David asked. I'm going to my mother's, I said. I'm going to ask her what the hell is going on. She'll be asleep. It's past 9. I don't care. I grabbed my purse and my keys. David didn't stop me as I walked to the door. He didn't try to explain further or convince me of anything. He just let me go. The drive to Sunset Gardens took 15 minutes. I drove too fast, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing through years of moments, reinterpreting them in this new and horrible light. All those visits where I'd stepped away to give them privacy. All those times he'd visited without me. All those moments where I'd felt proud of him for being kind to my lonely mother. The facility was quiet when I arrived. The night staff let me in. They knew me well enough by now, let me pass without question. I made my way to my mother's room, my footsteps loud in the hushed hallway. She was asleep when I opened her door. I stood there for a moment, just looking at her. She looked so small in her bed, so fragile. How was this the same woman who had betrayed me? How was this possible? I turned on the light. She woke with a start, disoriented for a moment before recognition dawned in her eyes, and I saw it immediately, the moment she realized why I was there at this hour, with this expression on my face. I saw the guilt wash over her like a wave. "Maggie," she said. Her voice was small and uncertain. "Is it true?" I asked. I didn't sit down. I stood at the foot of her bed like an accuser. "Are you sleeping with David?" For a moment, she didn't answer. Then, very quietly, yes. The word hung in the air between us like a physical thing. I sat down hard in the chair beside her bed. "How?" I asked. "How could you do this? Maggie, honey?" "Don't," I said. "Don't call me honey. Don't try to make this okay. How long? Since July?" My mother said quietly. "Since he first came to visit without you." "That's 3 months," I said. 3 months of lying to my face. Both of you. Every time I visited, every time I brought him here. You were both lying to me. He was so attentive," my mother said. Her voice was trembling. "He was interested in me. Do you know how rare that is at my age, Maggie? Do you know what it's like to feel invisible for so many years, and then suddenly have someone see you? Really see you? So you decided to sleep with my fiancé." "I didn't plan it. It just happened. We were talking, and he was listening to me, and he made me feel." She trailed off, unable to find words. "Feel what? Desired? Special?" "Yes," she whispered. "You made me feel foolish," I said. I was crying now, though I hadn't realized I'd started. "You both made me feel foolish. I was bragging about him to my family. I was planning a wedding. I was happy, and you were both lying to me the entire time." "I'm sorry," my mother said. "Maggie, I'm so sorry. I didn't think about how it would affect you. I was so focused on how it made me feel that I didn't think about anyone else." "He's a predator," I said. The words came to me suddenly, and I knew they were true. "He is. He targeted me to get to you. Or he decided once he was here that it was fun to have both of us." "No," my mother said. She sat up in bed, and there was a strength in her voice that hadn't been there moments before. "No, Maggie, that's not fair. I am not a victim. I am 88 years old, and I made a conscious choice to be with him. I liked it. I liked how he made me feel. Was it wrong? Probably. But it wasn't because I was foolish or because he manipulated me. It was because I wanted to feel something other than old and forgotten." I looked at her, this woman who had raised me, who had taught me about loyalty and integrity, and I didn't recognize her. Or perhaps I was finally recognizing her. The person she'd always been underneath the mother persona. A person who was selfish. A person who was capable of betraying her own daughter. "I can't be here?" I said. I stood up. "Maggie, please. Please don't leave like this." "What do you want me to do, Mom?" "Wish you well in your affair." "I want you to understand." "I understand perfectly," I said. My voice was cold now. All the tears had stopped. I was moving into a place beyond grief, into a kind of icy clarity. "I understand that you and David are two people who decided that what you wanted mattered more than anyone else's feelings. I understand that. And I'm going to need a very long time to forgive that." I left her room without another word. The drive back to my house felt like moving through a dream. I couldn't quite believe any of this was real. I kept expecting to wake up. I kept expecting this to be revealed as some kind of terrible misunderstanding. But it wasn't. It was real. My fiancé and my mother had been having an affair for months. I had been planning a wedding to a man who was simultaneously involved with the woman who raised me. I sat in my kitchen in the dark for hours, just staring at nothing. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't make any phone calls. I just sat there and let the reality of it settle over me like a heavy blanket. By the time dawn came, I had made some decisions. I called David first. I told him that our engagement was over and that I wanted him out of my house. I'd had keys made for him. By the end of the day, he tried to explain, tried to apologize, tried to convince me that we could work through this. I didn't listen. I hung up. Then I called my daughter. I asked her to come to my house. I didn't explain why. When she arrived, I told her everything. She was furious. Furious at David, furious at my mother, and worried about me. She wanted to call the police, wanted to accuse David of elder abuse. I had to convince her that my mother, whatever her faults, had made her own choices. "Mom," my daughter said, "are you okay?" I wasn't sure how to answer that question. Was I okay? I'd just discovered that the man I was going to marry was betraying me with my mother. I'd learned that my mother was capable of the kind of selfishness I'd never imagined. I'd had my faith in the people I loved shattered in a single evening. "No," I said finally. "No, I'm not okay. But I will be." The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. And I've lived through losing a spouse. I've lived through the death of my father. I've lived through financial hardship and health scares and all the ordinary griefs that come with being alive for 62 years. But nothing prepared me for this particular kind of pain. It wasn't just grief. It was grief mixed with rage, mixed with shame, mixed with a kind of violation I couldn't quite name. I felt foolish. I felt humiliated. I felt like the entire world knew what had happened and was judging me for being blind to it. I stopped leaving my house for the first week. My daughter brought me groceries and sat with me, but I couldn't really talk. What was there to say? The man I thought was my second chance was a liar. The mother I devoted myself to caring for was selfish and cruel. The life I thought I was building was an illusion. My friends tried to reach out. Word had gotten around. Small towns are like that. People knew that I'd broken off my engagement to David, though not many knew the full story. A few close friends had pieced it together. I received casserole dishes and sympathetic phone calls, and I was grateful and horrified in equal measure. I didn't want to be a subject of pity and gossip. By the second week, I forced myself to get up. I forced myself to shower and get dressed and go to the grocery store. I forced myself to pretend that I was functioning, even though I felt like I was operating on autopilot. I didn't visit my mother. I couldn't. The thought of seeing her made my chest tight and my throat close up. My daughter wanted me to go to therapy. "Mom, you've experienced a massive betrayal," she said. "You need professional help processing this." She was right, but I wasn't ready to talk to a stranger about it yet. Instead, I went for long walks. I sat in my garden and cried. I called my son and told him the whole story, and he was furious in a way that made me feel both validated and sad. He wanted to confront David. He wanted to tell our mother off. But I asked him not to. I wasn't ready for drama. I was just trying to survive. 2 weeks after the discovery, I received a letter from my mother. I almost didn't open it. But I did. "My dearest Maggie," it began. "I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be. I've done something terrible, and I can't undo it. I wish I could. But I can't. I want to try to explain, not to excuse what I did, but so that you might understand. I'm 88 years old. I've been a widow for 12 years. I've spent the last decade feeling invisible, feeling like my life was essentially over. Your father was the love of my life, and when he died, I thought that was the end of my story. I expected to fade quietly away. But then David came and he saw me. He didn't see me as your mother or as an old woman or as a widow. He saw me as Diane. He wanted to spend time with me. He wanted to know my thoughts and my opinions. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in 12 years. I know it was wrong. I know I betrayed you. I know I hurt you. But I can't be sorry for feeling alive again, even though I'm deeply sorry for how it happened and how it affected you. I love you, Maggie. I'm your mother, and I will always be your mother. I hope that someday you can forgive me. I'm not asking for it now. I just want you to know that I love you." Mom, I read the letter 3 times. Each time I cried. Not angry tears, but something more complicated than that. Because I understood what she was saying. I understood the loneliness she was describing. I understood the hunger to feel desired and seen. And I hated myself for understanding it, because it felt like it was taking away from my right to be angry. I didn't respond to the letter. I wasn't ready. David left town. He sold the house he'd bought and moved to another state. He left me a letter too, but I burned it unopened. I didn't want to hear his explanations or his apologies. He'd made his choices and now he was making new choices, and none of it mattered to me anymore. October became November. The wedding that was supposed to happen on November 15th didn't. I didn't have to send cancellation notices or explain anything to anyone. The people who mattered already knew. The rest didn't need to know. I threw myself into work. I took on extra shifts at the hospital where I'd worked part-time since my retirement. I volunteered at the community center. I kept my hands and my mind busy so that I didn't have to sit with my thoughts. By mid-November, I started to feel something shifting inside me. Not healing exactly, but a kind of acceptance. This had happened. It was terrible. It was painful. It was a betrayal from two people I loved, but it was also just a moment in my life, not the entirety of it. I had survived worse. I would survive this. I also started to think about my mother differently, not with forgiveness, exactly, but with something like compassion. She was an old woman who had been lonely and who had made a terrible choice. She wasn't a monster. She was just human. Flawed, selfish in that moment, but human. I called her on a Wednesday afternoon in late November. Maggie. Her voice was uncertain when she heard me on the phone. Is everything okay? I'm not sure, I said. If you want to see me. Of course I want to see you. I always want to see you. I drove to Sunset Gardens on a cold, grey afternoon. Winter was coming early that year. The leaves had already fallen, and the landscape looked bare and skeletal. My mother was sitting in the common room, in the same chair where she'd been sitting when I'd first brought David to meet her. She looked older to me now, or maybe I was just seeing her more clearly. She looked small and vulnerable in a way she never had before. I sat down across from her. "Hi, Mom," I said. "Hi, sweetheart." Her eyes filled with tears. "I'm so glad you came." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us searching for words. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said finally. "I want to be clear about that. What you did hurt me deeply. But I'm also not going to spend the rest of my life angry with you." "I understand," my mother said. "I need you to understand something too," I continued. "I need you to understand that when you made the choice to be with David, you made a choice that affected me. You made a choice that hurt me, and I need to know that you understand that and that you're truly sorry for that." "I am," my mother said. "I am truly sorry, Maggie. I was selfish. I was thinking about myself and how I felt, and I wasn't thinking about you. I was wrong."
Yes, you were.
"If I could go back and change it, I would." "But you can't," I said. "So we have to figure out how to move forward. And I don't know how to do that yet." "That's okay," my mother said. "We can take our time." And so we began the slow process of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the anger would come back, when I'd remember something new about the deception and feel the betrayal all over again. But there were also moments when I'd sit with my mother and remember why I loved her. She was complex. She was flawed. She was human. We didn't talk much about David in those early weeks. There wasn't much to say. What he had done was what he had done. He was gone. The affair was over. But I did ask her once if she regretted the affair itself or just the consequences of it. "I regret hurting you," she said carefully, "but I can't regret feeling alive." "Does that make me a bad person?" "I don't think so," I said. "I think it makes you human. I think we're all capable of prioritizing our own happiness over someone else's pain if we're not careful. And I think that's something we need to be vigilant about." "Is that forgiveness?" my mother asked hopefully.
No, I said.
"But it's a start. Time is a strange thing. It both heals and exposes." Months passed after that first visit back to my mother. The winter holidays came and went. I didn't do much to celebrate them. My daughter insisted I come to her house for Thanksgiving, and I did. My mother was there too. It was awkward at times, but it was also warm and real in a way that felt earned. By January, I realized I wasn't thinking about David every day anymore. By February, I realized I was actually happy again, in small ways. A good book. A walk in the park. A phone call with my granddaughter. Happiness was returning, not in the grand, sweeping way it had come when David first reappeared in my life, but in these quiet, ordinary moments. I also realized something else. I had been living a kind of half-life before David came back. I had been content with Robert, but I hadn't been alive. I hadn't felt truly seen or desired. And when David offered me that, I grabbed it with both hands because I was starving for it. My mother had been starving for it too. This wasn't an excuse for what either of them had done. But it was an explanation. We were both lonely, vulnerable women looking for connection. He offered it to both of us, and we both accepted without asking questions we should have asked. I started seeing a therapist in March. It took me a while to get there. I'd resisted for months, but my daughter was persistent, and eventually I admitted I could use help making sense of it all. The betrayal is one layer, my therapist, Dr. Morrison, said during one of our sessions. But underneath that is abandonment. David abandoned you with your mother. Your mother abandoned you emotionally by prioritizing her own needs. And there's a part of you that's angry because you were always the one who did the abandoning in your relationships. You were the loyal one, the steady one, the one who put other people first. So what do I do with that? I asked. You learn that loyalty and forgiveness are not the same thing, she said. You can forgive someone and still have boundaries. You can love someone and still acknowledge what they did wrong. You can understand their humanity and still protect your own. These words became like a mantra for me. I repeated them to myself in quiet moments. I wrote them in a journal. I slowly began to rebuild my life on this new foundation. In May, I had a conversation with my mother that changed something fundamental in our relationship. I was visiting her at Sunset Gardens, and we were sitting in her room, as had become our habit. I asked her something I'd been wondering for months. Did you love him? My mother was quiet for a long time. I don't know, she finally said. I thought I did, but now I wonder if I loved the feeling of being loved more than I loved him. I was infatuated. I was grateful. But was it love? I'm not sure I know the difference anymore. What would you do differently? I asked. If you could go back, I would tell him no, my mother said. I would tell him that what I needed wasn't romance but companionship. I would have asked him to be my friend without it becoming something else. But I didn't have the wisdom in that moment to do that. And now? I asked. Now I'm learning, she said. Now I understand that sometimes the things we want most are the things that hurt us the most. And that understanding is worth the pain, even though I wish I'd learned it a different way. I reached over and took her hand. It was fragile and papery and warm, and I held it gently. I forgive you, I said. The words surprised me, but I knew they were true. Not because what you did was okay, but because I understand now that you're a person too. You're not just my mother. You're a woman who has lived a full, complicated life, and you made a mistake. Do you forgive him? My mother asked. Not yet, I said. Maybe someday, but I don't think about him much anymore. He's becoming a memory, and memories fade. That summer, I started dating. It wasn't anything serious at first. A man I met through friends. Nothing earth-shattering. But it felt different from before. I was more cautious, yes, but also more authentic. I didn't pretend to be someone I wasn't. I didn't ignore red flags. I didn't let romantic hope override my good sense. That particular relationship didn't last, and that was okay. I realized I didn't need to be in a relationship to be happy. The happiness I discovered in small moments. A good book, a walk in the park, a phone call with my granddaughter. That was enough. Romance would be nice, but it wasn't necessary. I also made peace with something else, my mother's sexuality and vitality at 88. It sounds strange to say, but I realized I had been uncomfortable with the idea of my mother as a sexual being. I had wanted to see her as just my mother, safely contained in that role. But she was also a woman. She had desires and needs and a body that could still feel pleasure. Acknowledging that didn't make what she and David did okay, but it did make her more human to me. By the end of that summer, almost a year after the discovery, I realized the acute pain had faded. What remained was something softer and more complex. A kind of sadness for what could have been if people had made different choices, mixed with gratitude for what I had learned. I had learned that I was stronger than I thought. I had learned that betrayal doesn't have to define you. I had learned that the people we love are capable of hurting us in ways we never expected. And I had learned that understanding doesn't require forgiveness, and forgiveness doesn't require understanding, but both together create something that looks a lot like peace. I also learned that second chances exist, but not in the way I'd imagined. The second chance wasn't with David. The second chance was with myself. The chance to start over with a clearer understanding of who I was and what I needed. A year and a half after that terrible October evening, when I found those messages on David's phone, I was sitting in my mother's room at Sunset Gardens on a warm spring afternoon. She was 90 years old now. Time was moving differently for her than it was for me. Each day held more weight, more significance, because there were fewer of them left. We'd fallen into an easy rhythm over those months. I visited twice a week. We talked about books and television and the weather. We didn't talk much about David anymore. He had faded into the past the way people do when they stop being part of your daily life. Occasionally, I wondered what he was doing, if he'd found someone else, if he thought about what he'd done. But mostly, I didn't think about him at all. My mother, though, brought him up one afternoon. "I saw David's name in the alumni newsletter," she said, "from his college. He made a donation to the library." I felt a small flutter in my chest, but it wasn't the old pain. It was just a flutter, acknowledgement that he existed somewhere in the world, living his life. "Good," I said. "I'm glad he's doing okay." And I meant it. I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd moved from anger to indifference to something like benevolent distance. I didn't need anything from him anymore. I didn't need an apology or an explanation. His life had nothing to do with mine. "I've been thinking," my mother said, "about writing him a letter." Oh, I didn't know how I felt about that. Not to ask for anything or to reopen anything. Just to tell him that I understand now that what we did was wrong, and that I'm sorry for my part in it, and to tell him that I hope he's learned something from it too. "Are you going to send it?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe. What do you think?" I considered this carefully. 1.5 years ago, the thought of my mother having any contact with David would have sent me into a panic. Now it felt like something she had the right to do or not do, and my role was to support her as she made that choice. "I think you should do what feels right to you," I said. "But I also think you should ask yourself why you want to send it. Is it for him or is it for you? Both, maybe," my mother said. "I think I need to say it for myself, whether he reads it or not." "Then write it," I said. "Write it for you." She did write it. She showed it to me before she sent it. The letter was brief and honest. She took responsibility for her choices. She expressed regret for how she'd hurt me. She acknowledged that the affair had been a way of filling a void that couldn't be filled that way. She wished him well. I read it and nodded. "It's a good letter, Mom." She sent it a few days later. She never heard back from David, and she said she hadn't expected to. The letter was about her, not about him, and that was okay. Around that same time, I started volunteering at the community center more regularly. I was leading a grief support group for people who'd experienced major losses or betrayals. I was reading from my experience, offering what wisdom I'd gained, listening to other people's stories of heartbreak and recovery. In one session, a woman named Patricia shared her story about discovering her husband of 40 years had been having an affair. "I feel like everything I believed about my life was a lie," she said, and I recognized myself in those words so clearly it almost took my breath away. "It was a lie," I said gently. "But it was a lie he told you, not a truth about you. Your marriage had some beautiful moments in it, and those moments were real. They don't get erased because he made bad choices." As I said it, I realized I was finally understanding my own situation in a deeper way. David and I had had real moments together. The kiss by the lake was real. The late-night conversations were real. The genuine affection we'd felt for each other was real. The lie was about his fidelity to me, not about whether he was capable of caring about me. Those weren't the same thing. In the fall of that year, my mother passed away. It wasn't unexpected. She was 90 years old, and her health had been declining. But it was still devastating. I held her hand as she died, and I whispered to her that I loved her, that I forgave her, that I would miss her. Because I did. Despite everything. Despite the betrayal and the pain. She was my mother, and I loved her. Going through her things after she passed, I found a box of letters. Letters from my father, from my children, from friends. And there, at the bottom, was a draft of that letter to David. She had written several versions. In some she was angry, in others she was sad. The final version, the one she sent, was the one where she'd found peace. I kept that draft. I read it sometimes, and I was grateful to her for showing me that even people who make terrible mistakes can still seek understanding and growth. 6 months after my mother's death, I was at a coffee shop when I ran into David. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 years. For just a moment I didn't recognize him. He'd aged. We both had. And there was a sadness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. I almost turned around and left. But something made me stay. Something made me acknowledge his presence. "David," I said simply. He looked up, and recognition flashed across his face. "Maggie." We stood there for an awkward moment. Then, surprisingly, I said, Do you have time for a coffee? We sat at a small table in the back corner. We didn't talk about the affair, we didn't rehash the past. Instead, we talked about the years that had passed. He asked about my children and grandchildren. I told him about my mother's death and how I was doing with it. He said at one point, "For everything, I know that's not enough, but I am sorry." "I know you are," I said, and I believed him, not because his apology fixed anything, but because I could see that he was someone who had been changed by what he'd done. Whether that was because of genuine remorse or just the passage of time and new experiences. But I could see it. "Your mother sent me a letter," he said, "a year ago. I never responded, but I read it many times." "I know," I said. "She told me she sent it." "It helped me understand something," he said. "It helped me understand that we were both looking for the same thing in different ways, and that I took advantage of that." I nodded. "She was looking for someone to see her." "You were looking for? I don't know what you were looking for, but the two of you found something together that hurt me. I've forgiven both of you for that. Not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to anger was only hurting me." We talked for another hour. By the time we parted ways, I felt something had shifted. Not closure, exactly. We weren't going to be friends. But there was a kind of peaceful understanding. We had both learned something from this experience. We had both been changed by it. "I hope you're happy," he said as we stood to leave. "I am," I said, and I meant it. "I hope you are too." 3 years have passed since that October evening when I discovered the truth about David and my mother. I'm 65 years old now. I have grey hair that I've stopped trying to hide. I have lines on my face that tell the story of a life lived fully, with all its joys and sorrows. I've become someone I didn't expect to become, a woman who has been betrayed and has chosen to live anyway, to love anyway, to trust again. Not blindly, but wisely. People sometimes ask me if I regret meeting David again after all those years, if I wish I'd ignored that friend request on Facebook. And my honest answer is no, I don't regret it. If I had ignored him, I would have spent the rest of my life wondering what if. I would have carried that unanswered question into my old age. Instead, I got my answer. The answer was painful, but it was real. What I learned from David and my mother's affair is that people are more complicated than we want them to be. We want the people we love to fit into neat categories: good or bad, trustworthy or untrustworthy, selfish or selfless. But the truth is that most people are all of these things at different times. David was capable of genuine affection and genuine deception at the same time. My mother was a devoted parent and a selfish lover at the same time. And I was a loyal daughter and a blind woman at the same time. Understanding this hasn't made me cynical. If anything, it's made me more compassionate. I see people now as complicated beings doing the best they can with the resources they have. Sometimes their best isn't good enough. Sometimes they hurt people they love. But that doesn't make them monsters. It makes them human. I've also learned something about myself that I didn't expect to learn. I learned that I was waiting for someone else to make me feel alive. I was waiting for David to come back and save me from my quiet, ordinary life. And what I didn't understand was that I didn't need to be saved. I needed to save myself. I needed to find my own joy in my own life, independent of whether a man was telling me I was beautiful or desired. Since my mother passed, I've become very close to my grandchildren. My oldest granddaughter is in college now, studying to be a therapist. My grandson is learning to be a carpenter. My youngest grandchildren are still in elementary school, and I help take care of them after school. There's a rhythm to my life now that feels genuine and grounded. I'm not dating anyone seriously. I've gone out with a few people over the past year, but nothing has stuck, and that's okay. I'm not looking for someone to complete me. If someone comes along who enhances my life, that would be wonderful. But I'm not dependent on that happening for my happiness. What I am doing is living, really living. I travel now. I've been to Europe and South America. I take classes at the community college. I'm currently studying art history. I volunteer at the library and at the community center. I read voraciously. I spend time with my friends. I spend time with my children and grandchildren. I spend time with myself. One thing I did that surprised me was that I donated money to the university where David went to college. But I didn't donate it to the general fund. I donated it specifically to create a scholarship for older people returning to education. Students like my mother had been if she'd been born in a different time, in a different world. Women who'd spent their lives in service to others and who wanted to reclaim something for themselves. I didn't tell David about it. He doesn't need to know. But every time I think about those scholarships being given out, I think about my mother. I think about how her life might have been different if she'd had more options, more education, more independence. And I think about how that scholarship might give other women a different path than the one she took. The other day, my granddaughter asked me if I was happy. She was doing homework for her psychology class, studying resilience after trauma, and she wanted to know how I'd come through my experience with David. Am I happy? I repeated. Yes. But not in the way I thought I would be. When I was younger, I thought happiness meant having the perfect husband and the perfect life. I thought it meant being chosen by the right person. Now I know that happiness is something you create for yourself. It's in the everyday moments. It's in finishing a good book and having time to reflect on it. It's in cooking a meal for my grandchildren. It's in a phone call with an old friend. It's in learning something new. It's in knowing myself and liking what I find there. But weren't you sad, she asked, when you found out about the affair? Yes, I said. I was devastated. I felt betrayed and foolish and angry. And for a while, I couldn't see past that pain. But I learned that sadness and happiness aren't opposites. You can be happy and still carry sadness. You can move forward and still honor what was lost. You can forgive people without forgetting what they did. I think about my mother often. I think about her in that bed at Sunset Gardens, finally feeling alive again after years of invisibility. I understand now that her choices came from a place of deep longing. It doesn't excuse what she did, but it helps me understand it. And understanding is a kind of peace. I think about David sometimes too. I heard through mutual friends that he got remarried a year ago. I'm genuinely happy for him. I hope his wife knows what he's capable of. I hope he's learned from his mistakes. I hope he's happy. But mostly, I think about me. About the woman I've become. About how this experience, as painful as it was, cracked something open in me. It cracked open my naivete. It cracked open my need for external validation. It cracked open my ability to see people as they actually are, rather than as I need them to be. And in that cracking open, I found myself. The real me. Not the version of me that was waiting to be rescued. Not the version of me that needed to be desired to feel worthy. But the actual, authentic, complicated, flawed, and beautiful me. To anyone listening who has experienced betrayal, who has had their trust shattered, who has felt foolish and angry and devastated, I want you to know that it gets better. Not because time heals all wounds. That's a cliché and it's not entirely true. It gets better because you choose to grow from it. It gets better because you do the hard work of forgiving, both others and yourself. It gets better because you learn to love yourself in a way that doesn't depend on anyone else's validation. The day I realized my childhood sweetheart was sleeping with my mother was one of the worst days of my life. But it was also the beginning of my life in a way. It was the day I stopped waiting for someone else to make me feel alive and started making myself feel alive. And that, I've learned, is the real second chance.